All right, I think it's this is a good time for us to just get started with an introduction to what Mainframers is, what we're here today for, and then I'm sure we'll also get some more numbers coming as they get their beers, as we mentioned before. Um, I just wanted to introduce what session we have today. We're doing something a little bit different from our usual Mainframers sessions, where we've actually got a panel event open with some four great speakers to talk about cloud and mainframe. So we've got the great name of Cloudy with a Chance of Mainframe, if anyone remembers that film. Um, and I am Sam Catling. I am a UX designer that works with mainframe software, and I've actually worked with very closely with Tony before. Hey Tony. And we've also got Marcus, who's going to be co-hosting with me. Marcus, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, yeah, certainly. My name's Marcus Davage, and I'm a software engineer for BMC Software.
Great, thanks, Marcus. All right, should we take people through our usual spiel of what is mainframers? Marcus, do you want to take us away for what Mainframers is and how you can get involved with the community?
Yeah, sure. It's a loosely coupled bunch of people of mainframe enthusiasts. It started before COVID with actual physical meetups, and then when the COVID lockdown happened, we all went virtual, and it's just grown and grown since then. Some of our organizers are from America or Germany or Scotland and other far flung places. You can get in touch with us on LinkedIn. We have a LinkedIn group. We have a Slack channel. There's the URL there, and all of our events appear on the Meetup app, which is the link there on the left.
Yeah, so you have also the opportunity to get involved if you're interested and love the sound of this group. We have fortnightly meetings where we get together, talk about what's going on in Mainframe, plan our next event, and we usually run events quarterly, so it's not too much of an effort. If you want to get involved as an organizer, it's up to probably about 30 minutes a week of extra work that you'll be doing. And then if you want to be a speaker, we basically just have a meeting before and then chat to you, and you can provide some slides before the session. We also welcome recruiters, and we have in the past done live events. So if you want to sponsor an event or host an event, let us know. We'd love to hear more about it as well. Without further ado, I'll talk a little bit and introduce the speakers that we have here. As I mentioned, Tony Papageorgio is here today to speak. We also have Claire Connor, Richard Gamblin, and Stuart Ashby from our very own Mainframers team. Tony, do you want to give us an introduction to yourself and maybe also a fun fact if you have one?
Yeah, sure. So hi everyone. So I have an interesting story to tell, I guess. So I've recently joined Microsoft a couple of months ago. Prior to that, I had 18 years experience at IBM, working on various different parts of the software. I was working with Sam and a few other people. But what I'm doing now in Microsoft is I work for the Azure part of the organization, the cloud part of the organization, but specifically focused on modernizing, helping customers to modernize their mainframe real estates with cloud. So sort of everything from integration to sort of how can we find the right platform for the right workload. Fun fact, I don't know. I'm a very keen skier, and it's snowing at the moment in various parts of the world on mountains, and I really wish I was there.
Yes, I know that Tony is very keen skier. His office always had lots of ski runs all over the walls. So thank you, Tony. Claire, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, Claire Connor. I'm Principal Pre-Sales Consultant at Geniez AI. I only joined here at the beginning of January, so this is a new adventure for me as well, Tony. So we're in that together, absolutely. Prior to that, I was with Insono, and prior to that, IBM. Fun fact, Tony, I'm going skiing in 2 weeks.
Oh, amazing. We'll talk
Where are you
afterwards
off
where
to?
you're going.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Claire. Richard, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi everybody. My name is Richard Gamblin. I work for Microsoft as well. I work in Microsoft's consulting business. So where Tony is talking about the kind of what and what are the options, how do they work? The kinds of things that I'm talking about is more about, as you go through change, how would you do that? What's the approach that you would take? And then how do we structure that and break it down into projects that you can deliver? So it's kind of a combination of a strategy and a consulting role. Fun fact from me, I'm very disappointed, Tony. Actually, I thought we were going to go with the doors on the different Z machines, and I was going to lead with the latest one, which does have the best doors. Fun fact, I think I will leave. I will go on mute from time to time because my golden retriever outside will be barking the door down in a bit. So apologies in advance for that.
Oh, that's a great excuse to go on mute. Thanks, Richard. And Stuart, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Sam. Yeah, Stuart Ashby, been around the mainframe for 42 years. So lifelong mainframer. I work at PopUp Mainframe, where we leverage IBM technology on both cloud and the IFL processors, Linux 1 and Linux on Z. So you can have cloud-like test environments spun up and decommissioned at will. And fun fact, I love playing golf courses, famous golf courses around the world. And when this event finishes, I'll be watching the PGA tournament that's coming from Torrey Pines, north and south, that I was there a couple of years ago. So looking forward to remembering those holes and how badly it all went.
I won't ask you your handicap, Stuart. That sounds great. Great. So as I mentioned, this is going to be a panel event. So if anybody does have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat. We'll be filtering our way through them, and we'll ask them as we go through. We do have a set of questions readily prepared to speak to our panel, but I have been told by Richard that he's quite prepared for any juicy questions that come in. So don't be afraid to ask them. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can see everybody's lovely faces. And Marcus, do you want to take us away with the first question?
I certainly will. So as a first question, I'm going to throw our speakers into the deep end. And we have to ask, what's better, the mainframe or the cloud? Richard, you can start off.
Sure, absolutely. That's an easy question, Marcus. That's a very easy question. It depends on what you're doing with it. What I think is really funny about this question is it's very typical to get kind of quite strong responses from people because you're like, hey, we're going to talk about cloud and this. Like, well, yeah, but my thing is mainframe. Or you'll go to cloud folks and say, hey, we'd like to talk about, mainframe technologies. And they're like, well, that's not something I'm familiar with. So I'm kind of going to draw away into my comfort zone. But I think one of the things that is more and more common is that organizations are having to span the two. And I think that's really the crux of the discussion for this evening, because the actual, which is better, I think a more useful question is, how do we make sure that we're aware of the strengths of each of them so that we can take advantage and kind of harness them? The example that I've given in the past is, if you think about the conductor of an orchestra, right? The conductor is the organization, the enterprise architecture function often. And it's like, hey, we've got wind instruments over here, we've got brass over there, we've got percussion. You wouldn't just pick one. Actually, the best symphonies come from blending all of them. And it's our ability to be able to understand what emotive things we get, what powerful things that we get from each part of it is the most useful. So while I would love to say it's one, actually you don't want one instrument giving you everything. You want the whole orchestra to your benefit.
And I think that's a pretty good definition of what hybrid cloud is, but I guess we'll move on to that later on. Has anybody else got a good answer? What's better, mainframe or cloud? I'm opening it up to the stage.
Yeah, go for it. I definitely agree with Richard's thing of it depends, and it is very difficult to look at any IT environment as like standalone. People of clients, customers, industries have got to where they are through organic growth, and although maybe if you were to look at a completely greenfield site, you might do something differently. You can't tear everything down and start again. You see it in all sorts of other areas as well, but you have to be able to improve and build on what exists today and make that better, utilize it in different ways. And if you've started as an organization from a situation 50, 60 years ago with some really core important mainframe capabilities, and you've grown up and you've built your IT system around that, just trying to rip that out and throw it away is obviously going to be a massive challenge. Equally, if you've started relatively recently with some new capabilities or functionalities in the last 10 years in the cloud, well, just because it's now scaled and has become more central to the strategy of the organization, we're not just going to suddenly move that onto the mainframe, right? So as Richard said, it's about marrying those two together and being able to find the strengths of both of them and link them together rather than just one is better than the other.
Are you sure you and Richard weren't DBAs in a past life, answering every question with "it depends"?
No, we've just been in the mainframe world for a little while, Mark.
Can I add one caveat, which is I think we've done a massive disservice to the rest of the IT infrastructure that sits out there, right? Because this we've already fallen into the pitfall. Is mainframe and cloud? Well, there's lots of different kinds of cloud.
Yeah.
There are a couple of different kinds of mainframe, but there's a whole suite of different applications, servers, environments out there. So, let's be completely open in all this. There's a huge variety of different platforms out there.
I'll just throw it. I mean, we've sort of sat on it like, well, it depends what's on the fence. I'll just do a different thing and just attack the question and say that what one is like a piece of hardware and the other is a consumption model. So they're sort of like, you can have.
I'm gonna butt in there. The mainframe was the original cloud because it's all about shared consumption model,
because
right?
it was like shared resources. Yeah. Yeah.
But when you think of it, you actually, as an end user on your mobile phone, you're using everything all at once. Because, for example, if you're using an internet banking app, you've got the mobile phone interface, then that goes through the cloud to some sort of distributed web server, which goes into an application server, which then eventually finds its way to the mainframe, which contains all of the customer data and the banking data.
Yeah, so you can't do that whole end thing without both, or as Richard said, the whole suite of capabilities, right?
Any other comments before I hand over to Sam to ask the next question?
Well, I think the next question is also an interesting discussion on a similar topic. And it's talking more from an organizational level and about how we basically strive to remove the silos between cloud and mainframe. So how can cloud sit alongside each other? And I might lean to Tony to answer this one to start off with.
Yeah, sure. So I spent probably the last 10 years working in the sort of mainframe integration space, as trying to tie quite often tie mainframes to clouds, right? And this meant that you got involved in a lot of projects where you had the mainframe team and the cloud team or the distributed team trying to talk to each other and agree on what this API interface was going to be, or how we're going to do Kafka, or something like that. And culturally, it's really interesting to watch two sets of people who are fundamentally doing very similar things. You know, they're both doing large enterprise IT engineering, but they have very different languages, different ways of talking about things, and sort of different cultures, ways of approaching and doing things. And one of the things we saw during that time is the industry sort of when we started doing this in 2015, or when I started doing this, sorry, in 2015, you would typically go into a customer and you would see that they'd have the teams organized by the technology. So you would have the mainframe team, you would have the distributed team, you'd have the cloud team, the mobile team, right? And if a company wanted to do something and say, oh, we want to build a new experience for the customer, it's going to cross-cut all of these teams, and you had all of these handoffs, and everything took ages to get anything done. If anyone knows anything about Conway's law, it's like horrible every time you have to move between teams. And one of the things we started seeing, and we actually had to change the design of our products at one point to sort of accommodate this, was you start to see some companies shifting. So, well, we don't like this. We actually want to align teams around business functions. So we might, you know, we're a big bank and we're going to have like retail banking. We're going to have like sort of car insurance, house insurance, mortgages, loans, and we're going to organize teams that cross-cut all of that IT infrastructure, all within one team for that business function. And that throws up a very interesting question of, with all of those people now in the same team, what language and what culture are they going to use to get on and do everything? So that you sort of start having, you know, well, I'm the mainframe person in this team, and they want to work with, you know, DevOps, and they want to do things this way. And how do I do that on my platform so I can fit with what the rest of the team wants to do? So that was kind of really interesting as we sort of saw some of that dynamic shift. And I think that's ultimately the answer of how they start to sit alongside each other. You start to integrate, you start making conversations across boundaries, and eventually it just becomes, you know, different specialities within the same team to ultimately deliver a piece of business function, business value.
Yeah, really fascinating. I think this was a problem that we experienced with any kind of design work as well, for like how do you cater towards that broad set of audiences, and the type of user that you would be trying to research in one end of the business but not make sense on the other end of the business. So when you're trying to combine the experiences and across those areas, it was always an interesting process to go through that. I wonder, does anybody else have anything they want to add to breaking down those silos and working alongside each other?
I'd like to add something, Sam.
Mm-hmm.
The removal of the word mainframe before any of the department names is a good thing, because Tony touched on, people are doing very similar things. So I'd like to see as people like myself retire and being replaced by early in career individuals that they don't necessarily want to be associated with. I don't want to be a mainframe DBA. Perhaps I'm going to be a DBA, and then I might touch some data that is hosted on a platform, whether it's Azure or GCP or a mainframe. The relevant thing is that data is my job, you know, is my passion, or whatever it is that gets you there. And the tooling, if that can obfuscate the actual layer that they're interacting with, that's one of the things that I think that trying to sell someone a job that has the word mainframe in it, you know, I'm a mainframe DBA, I think that's tough. But if you're, you know, maybe with DevOps, if you're a DevOps engineer, it doesn't matter if you're doing DevOps and there's some background mainframe work or cloud work. I think that's the important thing. And what I've seen so much is that there are difficulties when people are trying to protect those silos. You know, I don't want to see my power eroded by joining with other teams. I think there's a lot of culture change that it's about the end result rather than who's most important.
Yeah. I think that's such a good point. Just thinking about just the nature of younger people coming into the workforce, they're not expecting to be in the same team for 10 years to be able to get to the point of being able to actually work with the products and software that they're working with. They're expecting to be able to become experienced within a couple of years and then be able to get more experience elsewhere. And I think Mainframe has a tendency to be seen as not as flexible. So I think that's a really good point. Like, remove the mainframe from it, and let's really see what the real skill that they're developing is here. Yeah.
Well, yeah, one of the things there to me is that broadening the experience. So as Tony said, working in teams that are cross technology, they're having to communicate differently, and then the mainframe SMEs are getting the experience of working alongside some of their distributed colleagues, which it helps break down the language barrier, because one of the things I have definitely experienced in my time in the mainframe space is we use different words for the same thing that is being done elsewhere. And so when someone else tries to reach across the aisle and have a conversation with us, it can be really challenging for them to hear the words and the acronyms that we use and are familiar with, which means something they absolutely understand, but they can't relate to because they don't know that term for it. And so being able to work on cross-platform projects or use technology that they're familiar with to access parts of the IT infrastructure that they haven't had the experience of dealing with before, I think is really important. And I think that goes both ways. It needs the mainframe teams to be open to exploring the benefits of cloud, but I think it goes the other way as well. The cloud teams need to be able to reach across the aisle as well and understand where the mainframe is coming from. And that's not always just getting a mainframe history lesson, because we've all been in those rooms as well.
Definitely.
Can I ask a kind of a slight segue question here, which is, as you were describing that, there were a couple of things that Claire said and that Stuart said that I think are really interesting. And it was kind of the crux of, what do we need? Better tooling, or no, better technology, or better culture, organizationally, kind of the cultural differences. So I think my question really in the discussion one is, who is it incumbent upon to make this change? Is it the technology providers? Is it the systems integrators? Or is it the organizations who are using these? That's an interesting thought.
That I really like that, Richard, because actually the technology, I think, it can be a really useful tool in breaking down these barriers, but culture is not defined by the technology that's there. So I think it's a really difficult one, because the individual organizations need to be able to facilitate that personnel culture change. However, they can utilize some technology tools to assist with that. So that's my personal opinion on that, but it is a really interesting one, because you can't just rely on technology.
Yeah, I'm going to build on that. So I used to have a right. Do you remember the period where everyone was going through the whole, like, if you use these tools, you're agile, or if you use these tools, you're doing DevOps or CI/CD properly, and if you don't use these tools, then you can't possibly, right? And I used to sort of not get on with this as a concept. I was like, well, no, the being agile or doing CI/CD, all those cultural things about behaviors and the way you work, not necessarily what you do. So I always used to think of it as tools and technology can help you do what you're trying to achieve. So if you're trying to achieve something culturally, there's absolutely technology that will help you work in that way. And equally, you could be using technology that's actively going to get in the way of you working in that way because it's not built with that way of working in mind. And sort of where some of the design stuff that, Sam, you deal with this all the time, right? It's just thinking about the way that people want to work and how do you build something that sort of fits into that rather than just sort of always is causing friction because it, doesn't quite work in the right way. But yeah, absolutely. There's an interesting thing here of, how much do organizations want to like? Do you actually make a conscious decision to change your culture, or is there something that has to drive that? Richard, to your point with GSIs, we're not going to generalize here, but an interesting story I once heard from a customer is they were saying, they were like, I really want to do more automated testing, but the problem is in the industry, there are these companies out here that make an awful lot of money by doing the manual testing. So they have no desire to let, execs think that, that there is a better way of doing it. So there's some interesting sort of commercial factors that inhibit culture as well. But yeah, it's very interesting.
Mhm. Great point. Thank you, Tony.
We have had a question on Meetup from Harry, who says he thinks the first question was never answered. The mainframe has a number of clear advantages such as security, observability, reliability, but especially transaction processing. And one person said something like, it's a piece of hardware, which is wildly inaccurate. Comments.
Tony, you're wildly inaccurate in your understanding.
Right. I put my hands up. Right, okay. Yeah. Obviously, it's more than a piece of hardware, but I think what I was trying to say with that comment is one is a sort of, a physical thing. You can buy a platform, a stack of specific software, and the cloud is really, when you look at it, a sort of a consumption model of how you consume it, like, and perhaps you could sort of say it's a sort of ownership and responsibility model of, is it mine, is it someone else's, and are they providing it as a service? So like in theory, you could have a mainframe that's provided to you in a cloud-like way, right? I think that's sort of the thing under there. But to those other points about it has clear advantages for security and observability and reliability, let's open that one up to the group. How many people think that it definitely wins?
I mean, security is always one of those ones, is it's only as secure as you design and make it.
Yeah.
Right. So I absolutely believe that the mainframe is the most secureable platform. Does that make it the most secure? Each to their own. I do think that there's the cloud has come a long way since its first inception in terms of the security piece. It obviously isn't 100% there, but then no one ever is. So I think that one's that piece. The observability piece, I think there are some great distributed and cloud-based observability tools, and I think that some of that the mainframe can learn from as well. Like the mainframe has a lot of observability tools, but some of the newer bits that are within the distributed ones are really interesting. And again, it's that kind of cross-pollination of ideas. I think that there's some bits there that can be learned from. And reliability, again, it's all in how you build and design it. I know you said that the cloud is just like a kind of consumption model, but again, it's kind of how you build it. In the mainframe space, you don't design or build the system to have single points of failure, even down to the hardware level that IBM build. Now, if you just stick one VM in the cloud, that doesn't have the reliability capabilities in there. If you put it in just one region, obviously that doesn't have the reliability. The piece there is, by engaging with the cloud-based model, you are relinquishing some of that control, right? So you are accepting that that flexible consumption-based model for a lack of control. And so if something goes wrong, and where, like, the cloud is just someone else's computer, right? It's still running on hardware somewhere, right? It's not actually
Rich is not
just
happy with that.
up there
He's
in
going
some
next.
fluffy cloud. So it is having to run on some hardware somewhere in the world. So you have just relinquished control as to where that is, or what particular hardware it is, or what particular wires are being plugged in places. You've just said, make sure I have access to it. And how you've designed that system very much balances on that reliability scale. So, and if you're willing to pay enough money in the cloud, you can get it to be pretty reliable. So, my opinion.
Yeah, I would definitely say that it's design based, because systems that have VSAM and mainframe transaction processing is one of the things that it is very good at. That's one of the stats that Mainframers love to come out with, that it processes more transactions than Google queries per second, to a reasonable magnitude. But I've seen organizations where they've got a Kix set up and they've got VSAM files in their Kix region. If that Kix region goes down, you can't share those files easily, those VSAM files. If your design relies on some older bits of technology, then that reliability can very quickly disappear. One of the questions, as being part of the Mainframers organization, we were going to ask about outages. Mainframes have had outages, significant ones. June 2012 at the retail bank I was at was really, really quite destructive to the community. And cloud have outages. So resilience is by design, and it doesn't always go to plan. So I think that the mainframe has limitations too, because some of the stuff is so old, it's going to take a lot of money to fix it. And that's one of the drawbacks.
But some of the stuff in there is so old, but that is an individual client's choice, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, design choice, right?
Yeah.
So I think where we get into is sort of that they can both be secure, they're both highly observable, they're both reliable, but they kind of achieve this in very different ways, right? You kind of mainframe, you're talking about the reliability of that box, and that I've got this one and my DR one, and whereas cloud's like, yeah, any individual piece of it might be a bit more flaky, but the whole, what you're consuming is like, yes, highly available. And I think the transaction processing bit for me is the sweet spot. Like, if you want to say, for high volume updates to a shared piece of data, and where you just need that massive vertical scale to solve the engineering problem, that's just where it sits and says, yes, we can 100% do this better than any other piece of kit in the world. So yeah, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at some stats on that just today for something else, and it's like 70% of all global transactions go through the mainframe, and 90% of all like credit card transactions. So like, that's because of that transaction throughput capability. There's a reason that the mainframe is known for that, and it is the powerhouse for it.
If it wasn't good at that, it wouldn't still be doing it, I think is the.
Yeah, that's probably what's kept the longevity. With every time a passenger gets onto a plane and their boarding card is scanned, for a few airlines in the world, that's an IMS transaction right there, just making sure that it's all being done. And imagine how many airports in the world for American Airlines and how many gates are all processing that at the same time. So that's why those organizations still have IMS applications running.
Mm-hmm. I
hope, Harry, that answered the question. Please reply if you want more detail.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye out on the meetup channel to see if he has anything more to say.
Just left.
Yeah. I'd quite like to maybe switch the order slightly, Marcus, because Stuart had mentioned about outages. And we did actually have a question around this and wanted to understand a little bit more about some of the lessons that have been learned from some of the outages that have happened more recently and in the past as well. I mean, both, as Stuart had mentioned, both mainframe and cloud experienced this. Did anybody have a particular scenario that they wanted to talk about? Is there anything that we've learned through those outages?
I definitely don't want to talk about specific outages and the root causes and stuff. But what I do like about significant outages, wherever they are, they become a compelling event that often drives investment. Yeah, that I'm not a great lover of when someone puts in another process just to stop that thing happening, rather than taking a step back and holistically looking at things. But one of the things that did come out of the June 2012 event I was referring to was that the people have been trying to sell in the bank that actually we were a technology company with a banking bias that people didn't buy into. And then during the event, someone on the board said to his peers, "Do you now get that we're a technology company?" And they said no. And so when people needed to come into our branches and withdraw money, did you get ledgers out? No, we waited for the technology to come back. And it then dawned on them that actually everyone is now a technology company with a bias to a trade or a background. And I think that's one of the biggest things that came out of a couple of things that we've seen with Mainframe, is that those organizations now recognize that they are fundamentally technology companies.
I think that's a challenging situation to be in. For some of the very, very large organizations, maybe they can afford to maintain like that. However, a lot of smaller mid-sized businesses will really struggle to maintain themselves as a technology company with a retail bias or something else. And so that's where they bring in actual technology experts for whose organization is meant to be the technology, so they can focus on their industry expertise. But then the challenge that I see with that is it's kind of relinquishing some of the responsibility, but not the risk, to another organization, be that a cloud provider or an MSP or whoever it happens to be. And then that becomes a challenge because they've accepted the limitations of that organization's capability to be a leading technology company with a retail bias. And they've gone, we can do the retail bit, but we need a real technology company to come and help us with all of the other bits, because we can't maintain like an advantage in their industry by focusing too much on that technology. Obviously, in much larger organizations, there's kind of the space to do that. But if you're a very small team with like 2 people, you are not a technology company with a retail bias, right? It's a challenge.
But even, I worked at a software vendor, and we didn't have many people around the world. And what the CEO said to us was, we're a mainframe software development company, so let's focus on what we need to do. And we had our own mainframe in the data center, and that's what we used when we needed that. But originally we had Exchange servers, and they were on-prem. So that went to cloud because Office 365 was an option. So we freed up people that were maintaining things that weren't core to our business to use their expertise to deliver an email service, etc., to us. And it was this went right down to what's core and what's not. Anything that's not core, we put into the cloud. And Gene Kim and I can't remember who the other guy was. It will come to me in 3 days. They were writing the sequel to the Phoenix project, the Unicorn project, and they were doing a data center tour, and they thought, oh, it's just another data center. They were so impressed that they then included it into the last chapter of the Unicorn project, that you do what you're good at, and where it's not critical to your business, you perhaps invite other people to look after those services, Claire, because you don't want to be an exchange. Potentially, you don't want to have people that are exchange experts, or I don't know what other kind of things are out there, but you want to give that to the people that are specialists in it, and therefore their services are probably good value, whatever that expert charges.
So it's like the cloud's not just someone else's computer; it's someone's IT infrastructure team.
Yeah,
yeah,
So it
'cause
comes with
it's
it.
just another
Like, do I want to do
computer
this, or do I
somewhere
want to trust it to someone else because it's got too hard for me?
I mean, I think on the coming back to the outages topic again, I think what some of the most insightful things that I've looked at with organizations doing this, there's a couple of forums that I run for technical leaders in Mainframe, but also in cloud. And I've sat in those forums and listened to the people who are inside of those outages talk about, how it transpired, what they did, how they did their root cause analysis and the outcomes and all of that. The thing that really strikes me is how similar the approaches for each of those. Like, it's always, okay, was this a an error? Was it a human error? Was it a cascade of events? So was it a process thing, or was it genuinely a technology, failure in the technology itself? And I think it's almost exactly the same, whether it's in fact, it's true of any platform, never mind Mainframe and cloud, it's true of any platform about what that does. I think the reasons that they're so similar is because they're so critical to businesses. From a cloud perspective, it can ripple across multiple organizations. And it occurs to me that it used to be that if there was an impact to somebody's core service that happened to run on a mainframe, it was isolated within that industry. But we're so globally connected now. Like, Stuart, the event that you talked about in the summer around that banking scenario, that has a ripple effect into the banking network. And I think what's so interesting is that these are relied on as such critical infrastructure now. Those kind of understanding and recovery processes are maturing very quickly, and the process itself is the same. And completely agree, Stuart. When those things happen, there is definitely investment case to say, well, how do we do this better next time? How do we make sure it doesn't happen again?
I think the interesting thing about this problem is, and it's very similar to any other aspect of engineering, right? Where you say, well, I'm engineering something to do this, and it's got to withstand this and attacks, and what if that goes down, this goes down, what if someone does this, what if someone does this? And you have all of this thinking around contingencies and what ifs and scenarios. And of course, any outage that does actually happen and causes harm is typically something that no one thought was going to happen, right? Or they thought it wasn't possible. And so each time there is something like this, there's someone somewhere who's learned something and gone, that's a thing. And so it's an interesting problem as an IT architect, because you're trying to sort of work out what it is, that might, take down one of these critical systems, and you're sort of trying to build for the unknown and the unforeseeable. But yeah, I mean, some of the things I've seen over time, I mean, I've seen things where like a data center went down because a farmer dug a really deep hole in a field and dug up a cable that everyone thought was like, that cable will be, it's reinforced, it's really deep, no one's ever. It's like, nope, you just cut the fiber and suddenly there's no connection. And then another one was a the big earthquakes in Japan. They had, I mean, thankfully, it's an amazing sort of hero story for the mainframe, because everything kept running across the whole country, even though that there was like data centers caved in on top of mainframes on their side, rubble, and it was like, but
It was those Batmobile doors that really
they all
helped.
keep going. But there's one outage during that, and it was because they had a data center on the 3rd floor, and the floor collapsed, and the thing fell 4 stories into the basement, and it was like, oh, okay, but it still survived. And the only reason it was an outage is because the network cable wasn't long enough to reach to the basement. So they came along, they found it like under some concrete, and they said, well, it's still there on battery backup. It sort of still looks like it's working. It's like, pull a network cable down, shove it in, and they got a bit of their telecoms back online, which is obviously important when you're trying to deal with humanitarian disaster.
Wow.
Pretty cool.
Wow. That is impressive. It's amazing what people can do or what mainframes can do in those situations. So,
yeah.
Thank you very much. I think it's worth us moving on to our next question, Marcus.
Okay.
I stole one from you, but did you want to ask the next one?
Yeah, I'm going to ask Claire first, then open it up to the rest of the team. What do you think is the most exciting thing coming out of the platform right now?
Oh, well, I have a feeling that it might be AI. I think AI is a really, really interesting thing across the IT industry as a whole, but actually I think it is really interesting for the mainframe space as well. Some of the capabilities that it's giving us, it's so compelling. The speed at which you can get answers for what are really complicated interconnected questions. I mean, we know our mainframe systems are spider webs of connectivity between different systems, because they've obviously grown up organically. And as much as we would like to think that every connection has been strategically planned, a lot of things are being held together with temporary solutions of string and duct tape when it comes to the kind of that application level stuff. It's like, oh, it's a problem for now, we'll do this quick fix and we'll come back and deal with it properly later. It never happens. So as these systems have organically grown over time, how they all fit together is so complicated, and being able to understand any of that in any sort of reasonable time frame is really, really challenging. So being able to make use of AI, generative AI, to facilitate that like data collection and understanding, so that you don't have to spend 2 days looking through like log streams or SMF data to be able to work something out, because the AI is able to do that grunt work for you. You as the mainframe SME absolutely still need your experience and skills to be able to kind of understand the nuances about how that relates exactly to your system, because like it's what you're great at. But it's able to make it much faster and quick, so you don't have to spend 3 days doing something. You can do it in like 10 minutes. And I think that's really exciting. I do think it helps with, at the other end of the spectrum as well, new entrants into the mainframe ecosystem, because maybe you don't know the exact place to go and look for something, but you have an understanding of it's kind of in that area. So you can use AI to help guide you to the answer of your question. So you can ask it like in nice, simple English, not mainframe doublespeak of acronyms and whatever. And it can help guide you to the root of the problem. Maybe you wouldn't get there quite as quickly as the super experienced SME who knows exactly which domain name to type in, but AI will help get you there and solve those problems and issues a lot faster than you would do on your own, digging through log streams or SMF reports or whatever. And maybe you don't need to read an IBM Red Book anymore because the AI will do it for you. I know, shock, Stuart. Sacrilege I said that, but so obviously it's still new and innovative, and things are changing with the generative AI ecosystem all the time. But I think it's really exciting to see how we can bring that to the mainframe space and make everybody's lives easier. Because I know Stuart's obviously got his eye on retirement because he said that already, but there's a few of us here who've got a bit longer to go.
But you do make a good point, and I'm sure this is relevant to the cloud as well, because you know there are anything that has been around for a few years is probably already legacy, even in cloud environments. But getting access to those subject matter experts can be challenging, and if you're early in career or perhaps not necessarily confident to go and look to talk to someone and ask them what you might see as a dumb question. The other thing is it does give you that ability to perhaps do some research and be ready to ask an intelligent question, you know, rather than just saying, oh, where do I find the yada yada? You know, you can use AI to help prime you for the right question, the one that makes you look like you are the brightest person in the room. And that's what I like about it, that you know you can use it, assume, trust but validate, because it doesn't always come back with the perfectly correct answer. But I agree. I think it does empower people who are early in career to not have to keep asking questions when they're uncomfortable about that.
Well, yeah, one of the things there as well, Stuart, how many times have you felt like you've asked a question, you asked it 3 weeks ago, and you can't remember the answer, and you've already asked it 3 times, and you go, I know I've asked you this question already, but can you please tell me the answer again? I know I've asked you, you've told me 3 times already. You know what? I can go and double check, and I can validate using AI first before I go and pester you again with the same question.
I'm just gonna sort of build on this a little bit, because obviously AI, most exciting thing at the moment. But I think to add to all of this, the angle of what it means for the businesses that run on mainframes, and you've got this. AI experiences, they kind of get the more sort of relevant data you can bring to the use case, the more magical they appear, right? It's sort of, you know, there's sort of AI where it's like, oh, I can ask it questions like I can ask Google, and it just gives me a nice, you know, formatted paragraph about information that's on the internet. Great. But then when you have like an AI that knows about all of your files on your computer, and you're like, oh, I can ask it things about, you know, what was my meeting, you know, last time I met this customer or something. It's magic, right? And it's doing the same job, but I think it's because companies start to think about how do they provide those kind of experiences to a generation who aren't raised on, well, I go to Google and I go to websites, and they're more like, I want to ask an AI chatbot about things. Well, how do you ask a chatbot about, you know, your what financial planning should I do for, like, I want to save up to buy a car, and where could I be making savings on my bank account based on my spending history? Like those kind of questions that someone, you know, kind of grown up today might just feel as an intuitive experience that I would never probably think of asking my bank that, right? But they have all the data. They could probably tell me if you had trained an AI. But then that presents these sort of interesting challenges of, well, how do you give AI that access to that specific data? Where are you running it? You know, how do you make sure it's up to date and accurate? And I think those questions of sort of data access and kind of where you're running that AI in a secure way, and how do we use some of the cool engines we got on the platform maybe to do that, sort of very exciting space to see. You know, I've been through a few banking revolutions with like mobile and then APIs and events, and now it's like AI use cases. So
Yeah, that I was
Gonna be
thinking
cool.
on that, and I was quite intrigued as well to get Richard's point of view throughout his career. How does AI stack up against all of these other major exciting turning points within the platform? Does it stand out to be significantly more, or is this just another mobile revolution?
I mean, I remember at the time, mobile felt really revolutionary. It was the point at which you could trade and do business and anything you like it with, the device in your pocket. And I think it's the confluence of things. You think about mobile, it wasn't just the device in your pocket because we'd all had mobile devices before. It was the ability to be connected and have GPS and all of the rest of it. And what we're starting to see now with AI and why it's so exciting is not that it's just, if you think about where particularly the generative AI started, it started as a wonderfully useful chatbot. If you imagine you do kind of a search engine search, you'd put some stuff in and you'd know how to navigate it. And then it took a little bit of retraining to start asking the question and then kind of refining the prompt. I think again, we're getting to the confluence of things that are happening because that chatbot was cool. But the really interesting thing is, well, I want to use it, just as you said, Tony, I want to use it in the context of the thing that I'm doing. It's a very different thing to have something that will help me draft an email versus, debug some code or help me write some code. And just being able to have that in the context that you're using it is super helpful. So I mean, to answer your question, I think it's right up there, right? I think it is making such a difference. And particularly now, that confluence of things, so you can use it in the environment that you want to. Now we have the guardrails of, well, this is really important data and access to restricted systems. So let's make sure we've got the guardrails that we're not putting stuff on the internet to bring back. And the other thing that's happening is kind of the evolution of the workforce itself. We kind of touched on it a little bit. Stuart, one of the things you mentioned earlier was, you're very experienced in what you've seen over a very successful career. But for folks who are coming to the platform, this is a time that they can use that to plug the gaps. And I think one of the things that I really like about this is the intent is not to replace people, but it's just to extend the reach of what they can do. And somebody once described it as, you remember when we were in the office all the time and you were just starting out on something, and actually even when we start out today, you're like doing this, like, hey, what's that thing? Oh, thanks, great. It's like that 2-minute thing, and it's just having somebody tapping on your shoulder to say, do it this way, or can I? Yeah, thanks. And I think it's the confluence of the controlled environment that we can use it in the scenario that we're using at a point in time in which we want to pick something up new and apply it. And I think that's why it's such a big thing at the moment.
And can I Claire, your company did a great demo at the GS UK event where they used the Geniez solution to query SMF. And to me, that was revolutionary because I know how to run the IFA SMF batch programs to interrogate the right stream, to get the, I can't remember what it was, type 20s or 30s or whatever it was, to look at performance data. I've got the knowledge to do all that, but I reckon that would have taken me probably like half a day to dust off the JCL, get it right, because I haven't touched it for 8 months or something. But with typing in clear English, I'm trying to get this, and something goes and it knows it already has the ability to do that stuff. That's where I thought this is the future, because it took 20 seconds to do something that would take me half a day with 40 years of experience.
Yeah.
And I could have given that exactly that same piece of work to somebody who had just knew what they needed, what the outcome needed to be. They could have done exactly the same. And that is just brilliant.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you, Stuart. I saw that demo as well and I loved it so much that I went and got myself a new purple jumper. But it's that speed. it's not necessarily taking away the skills and experience of your 40 years in the industry. It's taking away that half a day of trawling through papers and looking stuff up to, are you sure that that's the right syntax or anything? It's giving you the time back. So once you've seen the output of what the Gen AI capabilities give you, that is where your skills and experience become the most useful. So you're just offloading that half day of grunt work of trawling through stuff to get to the point where you add value. And it takes, how much more fun are you going to have if you don't have to trawl through all of this stuff?
Yeah, I can use my time on whatever's the most productive, because that piece of information I needed would have taken half a day to get to a point where I can make a decision. If I can make that decision in 5 minutes, then we, as an organization, we can be already half a day forward on the project plan or whatever.
And even in that piece, so yeah, in terms of like projects that you're working on, planned events, you can do that. But imagine that time reduction in a P1 incident, those outages that we were just talking about. If you still have to go and like trawl through the log reports of what is happening to cause this outage right now, well, instead of it taking half a day to find those answers out because you've got to dig through the reports, well, you're able to get those answers in just a couple of minutes, and you bring forward that decision point so that what action do you need to take to mitigate this issue. You've reduced that by half a day. That's some real value. So instead of having your whole system down for half a day and no one can log into their banking app, right? You've shortened it. Like, it's not getting rid of the outage completely. Something maybe still went wrong, but you're able to get to that root cause a lot quicker. I think it's really exciting, the possibilities that can be done with it, and yeah. It's interesting to see how different clients engage with embracing that. What projects are they looking at? How are they looking at improving the engagement of their users as well?
Yeah,
that engagement has been a surprising artifact of all of this. When if you look at from a development perspective, when the GitHub Copilot tool when the GitHub Copilot tooling was first released, it was looked at as a measure of kind of developer productivity and how much new code. What was interesting to me was that fairly soon after that, they actually started to measure the delight of the developers as a measure. And I thought that was so interesting, because I thought, well, what is that's such an interesting measure? But for a development organization, the delight was that all of that boilerplate stuff that they would have to copy and paste or have a website open, say this is not necessarily a website, but internal documentation of this is how you standard build this. So they could get the tooling to generate that stuff for them that was really dull, drudgery work. And they could focus on the really innovative, intuitive things that they had to really kind of work hard to encode, that they took real pleasure and pride in doing. And they were able to spend more of their time doing that and less on the boring stuff for them. Yeah. And it's true, that delight in work is one of the other things that was surprising as a side effect.
Mm-hmm. I'm just going to give a pause here because I know that we're having some issues with the chat, and what we want is to get those questions in for the last 20 minutes. So I'm just going to share our channels for anybody that wants to add any questions on any of these channels. We've got our team looking out for any of them. Yeah, please ask away your questions. We've still got a bank of questions that we can ask, but we're very eager to hear more from you all. So feel free to add those in. And I'll keep that up here for a little bit for anybody that wants to do it. I'm also very keen as well. We've been talking a lot about AI, and a big ticket item for me is to understand a little bit more about like what are we going to do around sustainability when it comes to AI? And it's becoming more and more of a focus. I hope it becomes a bit more critically thought by organizations of the sizes that we work with as well. But I'll go back to Claire because you're with Geniez AI
Yeah.
as a starting point, but I'm really keen to hear everybody's perspective around sustainability and AI on the platform.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one because obviously, as we know, actually every AI query takes a lot more CPU power than a previous one. So if you ask Google for what's the best restaurant versus asking ChatGPT what's the best restaurant, like they may well even come up with the same answers. It's not a particularly difficult question, but the amount of power that goes into generating the answer from the AI engine is quite significantly higher. So personally, how I see it kind of playing out is everyone's really excited about AI at the moment, and they're asking every question to it because they can. They want to see what the answer is. I think there will come a time where there is an understanding of what questions are best asked of traditional Google, for example. You just go Google that. You don't need AI to answer what time is it now, right? Just look at a clock. You don't need all of that processing powers and killing the penguins to tell you what time it is. I think there's going to be a focusing in on where it's going to add real value, and I'm going to see that in like everyone using it in their personal lives as well as within organizations. It's one of the things where there's obviously a lot of interest and investment within companies at the moment around AI because they're trying to work out where it fits best. And as Anthony said, it's where it comes to the data specific to the questions that you're asking. So I think it's going to be some of that focusing in on making sure that the data for the question you're asking and the complexity of the questions being asked will help reduce some of the sustainability pieces that we see. With obviously there's a lot more compute power needed to answer those questions using AI. I do think there's a kind of flip side to it as well, though, because especially as enterprise organizations, you can use AI to kind of look internally and validate your own systems and processes to see if there are any space there for more sustainable ways of doing things, more efficient ways of behaving, and maybe there's a balance of that upfront economic environmental output of, well, yeah, you've asked AI to generate you this answer to the question of how can I be more sustainable, but if you're actually able to take action on that and make your systems more efficient, make them run better, maybe that offsets it with the operational reduction.
I also think there's probably a level of transparency as well, so that people understand that. I think a lot of people, there's an abstraction that we have as users. We don't always know what's going on. If we had more transparency about how people interact and how much compute energy these things are, I think that would also have a big impact. I'm also intrigued because Tony and I think everybody else also mentioned this around different generations of people and how that will be impacted. I wonder if you have any comments around that and sustainability, Tony.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that's a really interesting point. So if you think about sort of generations coming up behind us, they don't see it as like, oh, this is a new technology. We might say, oh, this is new and fancy, and I'll use it for new and fancy things. But like the generation coming up behind us they're just going to want to use it for anytime there's a new technology. The generation that grew up with that and the generations after that are just gonna see that as the status quo, right? And you can't even imagine life really without it. And if you say, "Oh, well, I grew up before AI," they're going to say, "Oh, thank you, Granddad. That's an interesting story." It's like saying you grew up with black and white TV or radio. Like it's just, it's just it's gonna be hard to imagine. I think the challenge is so it's like the genie's out the bottle, right? The technology's there, everyone's having fun with it, and there's lots of things that people want to do with it. I think the interesting challenge, and it's a challenge that that engineers are sort of rising to, I think, is it's forcing a lot of questions about how do we build machines that are more efficient? How do we build lightweight models that take less compute to get similar results against the benchmarks? How do we design data centers to be more efficient and carbon neutral and use less water and all of these things? And I think because of that, sort of everyone can see like where this is going to go, and they say, oh, if left unchecked, this is very, very bad. So how do it's kind of forcing us to answer those questions perhaps sooner than we would have done otherwise without the innovation of LLMs. But as a result of that, it's putting more investment in answering those questions. And I think we continue to see more and more like acceleration in the rate of someone saying, well, I've got a more efficient chip, or we've designed a data center in a different way. We've got better solar panels. Energy companies are sort of stepping up the investment because they can see the need. So in a way, I think it's kind of one of the things you used to say from my days as a inventor at IBM was innovation's born out of necessity. Well, I think it's necessary for humanity to solve this problem, and there's lots of very clever people, brilliant engineers who are now highly motivated to come up with brilliant ways of solving this problem that perhaps wouldn't have done. That sort of technology would have lagged behind. So I think AI has caused a problem, but it seems to be a problem that we're addressing. There's lots of the big companies in this all sort of have commitments to try and address the problem that's being created, which is good to see, right? As sort of, it'd be terrible if they're sat there going, well, I don't care, it's
yeah, definitely. I wonder, Stuart, do you have anything on the topic?
I think Tony was just saying that I read a story that people are, cloud providers are putting data centers into sheds in areas where people are in energy poverty, and using the heat to come out of it to heat people's home and their water. So they know that heat is going to be generated. How can we use that most effectively? So it solves some people's problems whilst creating goodness for others. So I think the sustainability question is being constantly monitored. I think ESG is how some people judge their next vendor. Certainly, there's an insurance company in the UK that have a multicolored umbrella, and they're using tools that look at companies' websites, vendor websites, and if they are poorly designed, then that would be a negative in their decision making. So sustainability is part of a brand now, I would suggest.
It's very true. I mean, when a lot of the time when you're discussing kind of big strategic changes in an organization, that will be one of the topics that crops up. How are you going to be able to deliver this service in a sustainable way? What is interesting is that organizations that use whatever technology is, but organizations that are going down this path are saying, how can you make it simpler for me to instrument the CO2 emissions of doing it in this way versus that way? And it's almost it is what it is, but I need to be able to get the data in order for me to fulfill my obligations to either a regulator, an industry body that we've signed up for, but certainly to their board, and then they report that in their annual reports. So it's becoming less of a nice to have. It's almost the table stakes of your engagement now.
Yeah. That's interesting. I suppose I had quite a skeptical view about it, thinking that sustainability is something organizations say they care about, but perhaps don't actually care about that much. But it's also money, and I think that's another thing to highlight. The energy consumption costs money, so I do think in that respect it's a very skeptical view. Organizations do care about it. It'd be interesting to see where it goes from there. Yeah. Marcus, I think you've got the next question.
One more question from me. Where do you see both platforms, the mainframe and cloud, evolving in the next 2, 5, 10 years?
Gosh, that's quite a question. That's
I
quite
think,
a,
I think
What's the
10
rule?
10
Never make
years.
predictions about the future because they'll always be wrong.
They're
Say
always
something
wrong.
you don't want to happen.
Well, we know that Stuart has a crystal ball, so
Oh, okay, it's got away now, Sam. But yeah, I mean, I think 10 years is lifetime, isn't it, in technology? But in the next 2 to 5, I'm really hopeful that we will see a lot more of the merging of the mindsets. That it won't be a discussion about which is better. It's just we need compute, and let's use the platform that's good for transaction processing, and that might be because I think a mainframe now is probably only like a 4U rack anyway, 4U server in a rack. I know it needs some other infrastructure.
You
but
can get them as rack mounts now,
yeah. The fact
ones.
that it's gone from, in my history, we had a complete air-conditioned room. It was water-cooled. You know, it was the size of half a football pitch, because when the data centers were empty, we actually played football in them. So it's gone from that to being part of a regular data center. I'd like to think, Marcus, that this conversation, people will look at it and go, what were they talking about? It's obvious that it was all going to merge together into one single strategy of you pick the best platform to do whatever, and use the best tools.
I think that echoes your comment earlier on this evening about we should drop the word mainframe from office doors. It reminds me of when I started out in one customer as a DBA, database administrator for DB2. They said, "Oh, DB2 is on the mainframe. Fine, do that. Oh, we've got a DB2 on Windows. Can you administer that too?" Then they said, "Oh, we've got DB2 on iSeries or AS400. Can you administer that too?" And then they said, "Oh, you're a DBA, and we've got a SQL server running. Can you do something with that?" So it doesn't really matter what the platform is. It's the tools, the technique, the talent, whatever the business requirement is that we have to fit ourselves around. And as you were saying, things just going to merge.
Yeah, and I'd like to think that AI is going to assist with people that are early in career developing much faster, because we've been worried about the steep learning curve, and it is genuinely a steep learning curve to learn some simple things in the mainframe. But I understand it's a bit unclear at the moment, but I understand that IBM are going to start changing some of the vocabulary that someone touched on. I think it might have been Claire. You know, certainly in DevOps, I don't talk about compiles, links, and binds anymore. I just talk about build and deploy. You know, and I believe that things like IPL is going to be changed to just boot. You know, so you'll boot a mainframe.
Okay.
There's a lot of simplicity coming around the language, because it is going to be an okay computer to run, that everyone can understand. That you boot a mainframe, you boot your laptop, you boot your cat out the door. So yeah, I think that's where I would see in the next 2 to 5 years that we're going to see simplification of adoption and education around it.
Just picking up on the sort of the merging of the ideas, I would love to see them like merge technically. So just being like, it's no longer a, do I run it on a mainframe or do I run it on a cloud? It's just in my cloud, I have mainframes available under that. You know, I can have mainframes on premise and run them myself, or I can acquire them in through the cloud and that consumption model. And, you know, it's not, you don't have to choose. You can sort of get all the value prop of the Z platform, but from a cloud provider with all the goodness that brings around, you know, ease of DevOps and management, and you know, you can sort of offload some of the main ownership and the responsibility to them. I think, you know, seeing that would be, and as you said, part of the form factor of the actual hardware is going to sort of help facilitate that and facilitate that culturally in those data centers. But that's something I would like to see, but I'm hesitant to make a prediction because predictions never come true. So I'm going to say that they'll never go in the cloud ever. And they'll prove me wrong.
I think from my perspective, I actually want to pick up on what Stuart was saying around the steep learning curve of new entrants into it. I mean, I've been involved previously in events and discussions with young people, new graduates into the ecosystem, and one of the challenges that they face, especially in those early years, is how can I catch up? How much studying do I have to do? How many books manuals do I have to read to get up to speed with the rest of my team who've been doing it 20, 30, 40 years? And I've always been really strong at saying you're not going to catch up because you cannot ram 40 years of lived experience into 2 years, right? It's impossible to do. And I was seeing some of these young people really trying to burn themselves out with the effort of becoming as good as their other colleagues, as experienced. And it's such a challenge for them, and the pressure they put on themselves to get there and be seen as valuable and as knowledgeable as those very experienced SMEs. I do feel like if we can make these technologies more accessible, then that pressure that these young people are putting on themselves can maybe go away a little bit. No one needs to live with that stress. I was seeing some people who are like, they're staying up until like 2 o'clock in the morning trying to like work something out because like they don't know it yet. Like, go to sleep. Like, don't deal with it in the morning. So I hope that there's an element within the next 5 years where actually by removing some of those barriers, like even the terminology, right? It gives them more people they can talk to. They don't just have to ask their mainframe colleagues for help in figuring something out. They can go and ask like their friends from uni or like in other departments that maybe they've got a different networking with. So I really hope to see that adding value.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think there'll be some wildcard things that we haven't even considered. You know, we will certainly probably in the longer end of the spectrum, kind of closer to 10 years, we'll see technologies like quantum become more of a pervasive thing. You know, we've got quantum safe cryptography already across mainframe, starting to be embedded in cloud now, and you will start to see quantum functions being offered. You know, full quantum functions at the kind of longer end of the spectrum. And there will be other things. You know, if you look at when you think about when ChatGPT first launched, that was kind of 3-4 years ago, and like that apparently came from nowhere. Obviously the people working on it knew that it was coming, but there will be other things as well that we simply can't predict. Certainly quantum will be somewhere in there kind of later on in those years, but there will be other twists and turns to this story. And quite honestly, that's why I find it so exciting. We're not working with the same technologies that we were even 5 years ago. And it makes it really good fun to work in this industry.
and I think because of that, I mean, just to come back to Claire's point about, if there are people out there who feel they have to go and learn everything to sort of keep up, I'd say the best thing about this industry is there is always something new that nobody knows anything about when it first comes out. So if you as a sort of newcomers, like if you focus your energy on those things, you can sort of become that yes, I've got the senior expert who knows like 95% of what's going on, but there's this one thing where you can start to feel you add value. And that's something I tried to do at the beginning of my career, was always be like, what's the one thing that nobody here knows because it's so new? And then you can you can feel valuable quite quickly without having to have sleepless nights trying to remember everything you need to do on STSF.
As a 21-year-old, being a Python genius in a mainframe team could put you front and center very quickly, couldn't it? Right now.
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, look at what's coming and just remember that thing is a completely level playing field. Anyone claiming they're an expert lying, right? There's always, everyone's a newbie for whatever's coming out next.
There's always something to learn.
Yeah.
Well, I think that wraps up our last question for today, and we've actually come to time, and we're 1 minute over time. There was so much to talk about, and I'm sure we have plenty more questions that we would love to ask. But I would really like to thank all the speakers for spending the time talking about these subjects today. It's great to hear all of your different perspectives. I think we have weighed up the fact that there is value for both mainframe and for cloud and for all other distributed systems as well. So thank you very much for the time there. I wanted to just leave it with an apologies for the chat not being able to work. We'll keep a lookout for any other questions that we have coming onto our other various channels. And if the speakers don't mind too much, if there's anything that's specific that we feel like you guys would be great to answer, we'll send them your way. But keep a lookout for our other events that we've run. We have our Mainframers channel on YouTube, so check it out there, and this video will be going up on there. So feel free to spread it to anybody that will find it interesting. Marcus, anything else that you'd like to add?
Only thank you very much for tuning in and listening, and thanks to our panel, Stuart, Claire, Richard and Anthony. And stay tuned, and we'll meet you again sometime soon.
Yeah.
Thank
See you
you.
soon, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.